Dr. Hassan Khannenje. At the center of electoral controversy is the relationship also between Jubaland, the capital of which is the critical port of Kismayo, and the federal government in Mogadishu. Bring us up to speed.
There's been tensions between Jubaland and Mogadishu for some time now. It's actually not new. It's been festering for a while, and they've been to try and bridge that divide. Now, of course, the causes are both historical, political, and geostrategic. I think one thing that's been complicating all this is also the presence. You have external players, and a number of countries in the region and outside actually have an interest in that. And there's been, I would say, a relative failure actually by Mogadishu to try and reach out to regions in good time and try to make peace. The constitution of Somalia allows us a degree of autonomy for those regional states, including even conducting elections. And when you recognize that your constitution has given or has granted regions certain autonomy, it's incumbent upon you to try and find a way of working with them. Now, I wouldn't say this is a blow, because had Madobe lost, there will be actually other challenges Jubaland was also going to face. I think what we need to do going forward right now is Mogadishu and Jubaland and other states need to find a way of working together. Now, in the course of this program, we're going to discuss some of those things deeply with regard to some of the external interests and how they're actually fueling instability, not just in the region, but also in Somalia. And so politically, it may look like a blow, and it's indeed a blow, but increasingly, Farmajo has been fairly isolated, and in part because he has very limited control. You have powers, including some Middle Eastern powers, striking deals with regional, for instance, states, to the detriment of actually stability and functionality of the central government. And we are likely to see this thing perhaps go on for some time, unless, as Somalis themselves and as the region, we actually wake up to the realization that Somalia cannot be Balkanized. We have to find a way of making sure it's in our national interest. The long-term stability of Somalia is in the national interest of Kenya, Ethiopia, and the entire region. And so, even though we have allies, for instance, within Somalia, and we have friends, and historically, for instance, in Jubaland, Jubaland has very long historical ties with Kenya, but also the most recent history with regard to, let's say, the role played by the Raskamboni Brigade in trying to liberate Kismayo. Of course, it's of strategic importance to us. We have men and women under AMISOM, deployed in that area. And so it's important that it's stable. But then for us to succeed, and for the region to succeed, ultimately, the Jubaland and the national government has to find a way of actually working with the regions, working with Puntland and other regions, because it's not just Jubaland. Now, if it cannot do that, then they can as well even forget the idea of reuniting with Somaliland, which has been perhaps the most peaceful part of Somalia for the longest, and fairly autonomous. And so, personally, I'll put the challenge first to the central government of Somalia to try and reach out, but second, for the regional states to actually be willing to know that they live in one Somalia and there is no other country. And it's unlikely that these other regions or disparate regions are going to be recognized as independent states in time soon. Part of it because of the African philosophy, what the region believes, and the international community believes Somalia should be one.
All right. Of course, you mentioned about the regional interest as far as security is concerned. We know Kenya and also Ethiopia signed, a pact in 1963. There was a United Defense Pact, against Somalia then. But Jubaland also is becoming a very thorny issue between Ethiopia and Kenya right now, because also Ethiopia has interest right now. They feel that should Jubaland really become, as it is right now, the desire centralized structure within Jubaland, because of fear that more autonomy for Jubaland could worsen secessionist claims in its own Somali-inhabited Ogaden region in the country. And we know right now what is happening in Ethiopia as far as the federal system is concerned. But let's just get into it briefly. Kenya's interest also in Jubaland, having created a buffer zone. Jubaland was a creation of Kenya.
Yes. Jabal, thank you. I'm in complete agreement with my colleague. I think the philosophy of the thing, or the policy thrust that we need to understand is that it is absolutely correct that the idea of Balkanizing Somalia, which was essentially an Ethiopian policy during the time of Meles Zenawi, the late Meles Zenawi, came out of what was happening inside Ethiopia. Ethiopia also had a constitution that had Balkanized the regions, and the central state was strong, but the regions had autonomy. And this idea of building blocks was being foisted on Somalia.
Yes.
And I think that that's just a terrible policy, and that policy has not worked, and it is a conundrum that is wrapped up in an irony that everybody can now see, that a united, prosperous, democratic Somalia is in the fundamental interest of our country here, in the region and the world at large. The question then is, how does this happen? I think that the government of Kenya is a very strong supporter of Mr. Madobe in Jubaland. And our policy there is a buffer. If you look at the Foreign Affairs website now, the Jubaland is it's called a safe area or a special area. And the thinking about this, Debal, is before the terrorists or the Al-Shabaab cross into Kenya, we will have an instrument, a state system in that area that will help us stop these people from coming into Kenya. This is the correct policy for now, for the short term. But for the long term, Debal, the medium to the long term, it is a central state in Somalia that has got its act together, that has got its military, its police, its intelligence, its security apparatus, that can deal with the issue of insecurity in Somalia. That is our best hope. If we decide, Debal, that we are going to keep Somalia weak, and we're going to approach Somalia through the regional spectrum, Debal, what's going to happen is that the problem of Khannenje in Somalia, which is, as you know, Debal, a tremendous part of the historical problem in Somalia, this problem will now fester in Jubaland. The other day in Jubaland, there were large segments of the electorate. You know, Debal, the electorate is done through tribal clan elders who make lists so that they can elect the leader of Jubaland. And there's a big issue about how the lists was made. There's a very big issue about the legitimacy of Mr. Madobe. But at the end of the day, I think that the bigger issue is whether or not Ethiopia and Kenya have the same policy in Somalia. Debal, you know that Kenyan troops and Ethiopian troops nearly came to a shootout in Kismayo the other day because the Ethiopians have changed tack and policy that supports Mr. Farmajo in Mogadishu, while we in Kenya support the Farmajo, Mr. Madobe in Kismayo. So I think, Debal, that there is some problems with the policy and that it needs to be straightened out. And that policy needs to understand that Ethiopia and Kenya have to sit down together and say, okay, we've got to have a policy that is consistent. You know, Debal, our men and women have been dying in Somalia. We don't want that. At the end of the day, we want our military back to our country. We don't want our men and women going to die in this place. But we have to make these sacrifices, Debal, because the political elite in Somalia is just pathetic. Because they're not able to bring about, Debal, a coalition or a consensus that can return the Somali state to where it should be and then contribute to the political economy of our region. Last point, Debal. I think that there's a model in the north of Somalia that could be followed as a way forward. You know, there are two regions in the north. One is called Somaliland, which is self-declared itself independent, and there's one called Puntland. So the more mature one is in Somaliland, where they've had multi-party politics for a while. They've changed about 4 presidents. The current party, called Kulmiye, and its leader Musa Abdi, have not yet done elections in Somaliland, and this is a grave problem because many diplomats from this region have gone to Hargeisa and have given them a tongue lashing about this because there's no elections that are going there. It was a model a system that showed the way forward for the rest of that country. And that is faltering, and the Kenya government has to take notice of that, and the region has to take notice of that. Debal, the last thing I'd like to say is that we in Kenya have to understand that Somalia is our partner in development. It's our partner in every conceivable way. So is the region. And if we don't stabilize this country and make it a united and more prosperous country, Kenya will not be doing as well as it should be.
All right.